August 19, 1944, Normandy, France. The Allied armies have finally broken free of the hedgerows, but victory is far from settled. The German front in the west has cracked, not collapsed, and the difference matters. Entire enemy formations are still armed, still dangerous, and still capable of inflicting catastrophic losses if given time to regroup. At Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, maps are crowded with red and blue pins showing rapid movement, blurred lines, and uncertain gaps. The carefully phased liberation of France envisioned before D-Day is already unraveling under the pressure of reality. And at the center of that pressure stands General George S. Patton. Patton's Third Army, activated only weeks earlier, is moving at a speed that alarms nearly everyone above him. His armored columns are advancing so rapidly that core boundaries become meaningless, logistical planning cycles collapse, and intelligence estimates expire almost as soon as they are written. To Patton, this chaos is not a flaw in the system. It is the system. To his allies, particularly those responsible for coordination and coalition cohesion, it looks dangerously close to losing control of the war. The Allied High Command enters August 1944 with conflicting fears. One fear is that the Germans might stabilize their defenses along a major river line, turning the liberation of France into another slow, grinding campaign. The other fear is that Patton, unchecked, might outrun his supplies, fracture Allied coordination, provoke political backlash, or blunder into a counterstroke that costs tens of thousands of lives. These fears coexist uneasily, and neither can be ignored. At Eisenhower's headquarters, the problem is not Patton's effectiveness. It is Patton's independence. He is winning too quickly, on axes that were not approved, at tempos that defy established doctrine. He requests forgiveness rather than permission, and sometimes does not request forgiveness at all. His allies, British commanders, American staff officers, and coalition planners, begin to ask the same question in different ways. How do you slow down a general whose greatest weapon is speed without destroying the very advantage that is breaking the enemy? The first attempts to rein Patton in come quietly, through staff channels rather than direct orders. Supply allocations are adjusted, fuel priorities are shifted, operational boundaries are emphasized more forcefully on situation maps. These are not punishments but signals, subtle reminders that Third Army is part of a larger system, not a free-roaming force. Patton understands the signals immediately, and he ignores them just as deliberately. To Patton, August 1944 represents a fleeting moment in modern warfare when an enemy is disorganized enough to be destroyed outright. He believes, with almost religious certainty, that hesitation now will condemn Allied soldiers to months of unnecessary fighting later. His experience in North Africa and Sicily has taught him that German armies recover quickly when given time. He is determined not to allow that recovery in France. As Third Army drives eastward, capturing crossings, towns, and entire enemy units faster than reports can be compiled, Allied coordination begins to fray. British commanders, particularly Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, watch Patton's movements with growing concern. Montgomery's approach to warfare emphasizes deliberate preparation, overwhelming force, and strict control. Patton's advance appears reckless by comparison, threatening to unbalance carefully prepared plans for a concentrated thrust northward. This clash is not merely personal, it is doctrinal. Montgomery believes wars are won by control. Patton believes they are won by disruption. Each philosophy has produced results, but they cannot easily coexist at the same time in the same theater under the same supreme commander. Eisenhower finds himself trapped between success and stability. Patton's advances are destroying German formations at a rate no Allied plan had predicted. At the same time, those advances are creating political and operational tensions that Eisenhower cannot ignore. The coalition depends on trust, and trust depends on predictability. Patton offers results, but not predictability. Orders begin to arrive at Third Army headquarters urging caution. Language is carefully chosen. Phrases like maintain alignment with adjacent forces and avoid overextension appear repeatedly. Patton reads these messages, absorbs their intent, and then continues forward anyway, convinced that stopping would be the greater crime. The pressure increases when fuel shortages begin to bite. Allied supply systems, still dependent on Normandy ports and damaged infrastructure, cannot support unlimited advances on every front. Eisenhower must choose where momentum will be sustained and where it will be slowed. When fuel is diverted away from Third Army toward other operations, Patton recognizes the move instantly. To him, it is not logistics, it is restraint by proxy. Rather than halt, Patton adapts. He seizes German fuel depots, reroutes captured vehicles, and pushes his units to operate on minimal reserves. The margin for error narrows dangerously. A single miscalculation could strand armored divisions deep in hostile territory. Patton accepts the risk without hesitation. Within Allied headquarters, debates intensify. Some officers argue that Patton's actions threaten the unity of the campaign. Others counter that his advances are preventing the Germans from forming a coherent defense. The same facts support opposite conclusions, depending on which risks one fears more. As August turns into September, Patton's allies make a more direct attempt to rein him in. Clearer operational limits are defined. Explicit instructions are issued regarding objectives and boundaries. The language leaves little room for interpretation. Patton reads the orders, acknowledges them, and then maneuvers in ways that technically comply while functionally bypassing their intent. He does not openly defy command. Instead, he exploits ambiguity, speed, and the fog of war. By the time headquarters realizes what Third Army has accomplished, the facts on the ground force acceptance. New lines are drawn. New justifications are written. Success rewrites the rules faster than authority can enforce them. This pattern repeats itself again and again. Allied leaders attempt to restrain Patton through structure. Patton defeats restraint through movement. Each success strengthens his argument and weakens the case against him, even as it deepens private frustration among those tasked with controlling the campaign. Yet the consequences of this dynamic are not abstract. Soldiers operate at the edge of exhaustion. Supply officers gamble daily. Commanders make decisions with incomplete information, knowing that mistakes will be amplified by speed. Patton's approach magnifies both opportunity and danger, and everyone involved understands that the margin separating triumph from disaster is narrowing. As the Allied advance continues, the effort to rein Patton in does not stop. It evolves. The struggle between control and momentum becomes one of the defining tensions of the Western Front, shaping decisions, relationships, and outcomes in ways that will not be fully understood until long after the guns fall silent. September 1944 brings that tension to a breaking point. The geography of the war changes as France gives way to the borders of Germany itself, and with that shift comes a psychological weight that presses down on every Allied decision-maker. What had been liberation now becomes invasion. Every mile forward carries political consequences, not just military ones. For Patton, the border is simply another line on the map to be crossed at speed. For Allied headquarters, it is a threshold that demands caution, coordination, and control. Inside Third Army, the tempo never slows. Orders are issued with the expectation that units will be moving before ink has fully dried. Command posts relocate almost daily. Intelligence officers struggle to keep pace with enemy movements that are themselves reactive and fragmented. German resistance stiffens in places, collapses in others, and appears unpredictable precisely because Patton's pressure denies it any stable rhythm. The uncertainty feeds Patton's conviction that he is doing the right thing. Every pause, he believes, would give the enemy exactly what they need most: time. At Supreme Headquarters, patience wears thin. Eisenhower is forced to confront a reality he had hoped to avoid. His most aggressive field commander is simultaneously his most effective and his most difficult. Directly relieving or sharply disciplining, Patton would risk morale, public perception, and battlefield momentum. Allowing him total freedom risks something worse: a catastrophic overreach that could shatter Allied unity or hand the Germans an opportunity for a devastating counterattack. Meetings become more frequent, more strained. Maps are scrutinized for signs of overextension. Staff officers debate whether Patton's long, exposed supply lines represent brilliance or folly. British commanders argue that concentration of force, not dispersion, should define the next phase of operations. American planners worry that Patton's advances are pulling resources away from carefully prepared offensives elsewhere. No one disputes his success. They dispute its sustainability. Attempts to rein Patton in now take on a sharper edge. Orders are no longer merely advisory in tone. They specify limits, priorities, and timelines with increasing precision. Eisenhower emphasizes the necessity of coalition balance, reminding his subordinates that this war is not being fought by one army alone. Patton listens, salutes, and returns to his headquarters, convinced that the enemy's collapse will render these concerns irrelevant. The Germans, meanwhile, are reeling. Their command structure in the West is fractured, their reserves depleted, and their communications constantly disrupted. Patton's pressure compounds every weakness. Units retreat only to find roads cut, bridges seized, and escape routes blocked by forces that seem to appear out of nowhere. Entire formations surrender not because they have been annihilated, but because they no longer see any path forward that does not end in destruction. This operational success strengthens Patton's position even as it heightens Allied anxiety. Each new victory becomes both justification and provocation. Headquarters is forced into a reactive posture, adapting plans after the fact rather than directing events. The very control mechanisms designed to coordinate the campaign are being undermined by the speed of events on the ground. Fuel shortages worsen, and with them the stakes. Patton's forces are now operating on the edge of logistical collapse. Convoys stretch thin across damaged infrastructure. Any interruption, a blown bridge, an ambush, a delayed shipment, could bring entire divisions to a halt. Allied logisticians argue that the risk is unacceptable. Patton counters that stopping voluntarily would be worse than being forced to stop by circumstances. The debate is no longer abstract. It is measured in gallons of fuel, hours of daylight, and lives. Staff officers at all levels feel the pressure. A wrong decision now will not simply slow the advance, it will shape the remainder of the war. The uncertainty is total, and no historical precedent offers clear guidance for a campaign unfolding at such speed. As autumn approaches, the Allies stand at a crossroads they did not plan to reach so soon. Patton's relentless drive has brought them there, ahead of schedule and ahead of preparation. His allies continue trying to rein him in, not out of spite or rivalry, but out of fear. Fear of what happens when momentum outruns control, and fear of what happens if that momentum is lost. The struggle between Patton's instinct for speed and the Allies' need for coordination remains unresolved, tightening like a coiled spring. Every mile forward increases both the promise of decisive victory and the risk of irreversible error, binding commanders on all sides to decisions made under pressure, uncertainty, and consequences they cannot fully predict. By early October 1944, the consequences of that tension begin to surface in tangible ways. The weather turns against the Allies, grounding aircraft and turning roads into mud that strains already fragile supply lines. Patton's advance, once defined by fluid movement and surprise, now collides with physical limits imposed by terrain and logistics. Even so, Third Army continues to probe forward, testing German defenses wherever they appear weakest, forcing the enemy to respond rather than prepare. German commanders, battered but not broken, attempt to exploit what they see as Patton's vulnerability. Intelligence intercepts suggest plans for localized counterattacks aimed not at destroying Third Army outright, but at disrupting its momentum and exposing the dangers Allied headquarters has warned about. For the first time in weeks, German actions show coordination born not of strength, but of necessity. Patton's speed has compressed their options, but it has not eliminated their capacity to inflict damage. At Allied headquarters, these reports intensify the pressure on Eisenhower. He is now managing not just a military campaign, but the delicate balance of a coalition whose internal cohesion matters as much as battlefield success. British leaders express renewed concern that Patton's operations threaten to unbalance the broader strategic plan. American commanders are divided, some admiring the audacity, others fearing the cost of a single miscalculation. Eisenhower listens to all of it. Aware that any decisive intervention risks consequences he cannot fully control. Orders issued during this period reflect that uncertainty. They are neither a full endorsement nor a firm restraint. Patton is instructed to prioritize certain objectives while remaining flexible, a contradiction that mirrors the broader Allied dilemma. He interprets these instructions as latitude rather than limitation, continuing to press forward where opportunity presents itself. To Patton, hesitation remains the greater danger. On the ground, soldiers experience the effects of this strategic debate in immediate physical terms. Long marches, shortened rations, and the constant awareness that support may be hours or days away become part of daily life. Morale remains high, fueled by success and by Patton's unrelenting confidence, but fatigue accumulates. Officers at every level are forced to make decisions with incomplete information, knowing that the pace of operations leaves little margin for error. German resistance grows more stubborn as Third Army approaches areas the enemy considers vital to the defense of the Reich. Towns are defended with a desperation absent earlier in the campaign. Civilian populations complicate operations, adding political and humanitarian dimensions to military choices. Each engagement now carries symbolic weight, reinforcing Allied concerns that Patton's drive is accelerating the war into a more complex and dangerous phase. Yet success continues to validate his approach. Breakthroughs occur where caution would have predicted stalemate. German units surrender in large numbers, not because they have been annihilated, but because they recognize that retreat offers no safety. Patton's relentless tempo denies them the psychological comfort of regrouping. The pressure is constant, and under that pressure, structures crack. As October progresses, the question facing Allied leadership sharpens. Is Patton's advance a controlled risk that promises to shorten the war, or an uncontrolled gamble that could unravel months of careful planning? There is no clear answer, only competing interpretations shaped by fear, ambition, and responsibility. Every report from the front reinforces the same reality. Events are moving faster than the systems designed to manage them. The effort to rein Patton in does not cease, but it becomes increasingly symbolic. Real control now lies with whoever can keep up with the pace of change. The Allies find themselves reacting to Patton's successes even as they try to shape them, caught between admiration for what he achieves and apprehension over how close he is to the edge. The campaign continues under this strain, with momentum and restraint locked in a struggle that defines the closing months of the war in Western Europe. Each decision made in haste or caution carries consequences that ripple far beyond the battlefield, binding commanders to a path they did not fully choose, but must now follow. By November 1944, the limits of both German resistance and Allied patience are being tested simultaneously. The front has stretched into a long, uneven arc, and Third Army occupies a position that is operationally powerful but strategically uncomfortable for higher command. Patton's forces have advanced farther and faster than many planners believed possible, yet the very success of that advance now complicates the broader Allied picture. Supply depots lag behind, coordination with neighboring armies becomes more fragile, and the margin for recovery narrows with every mile gained. Inside Third Army headquarters, the atmosphere reflects this dual reality. Maps show impressive gains, arrows thrust deep into enemy territory, but they also reveal exposed flanks and overstretched lines of communication. Staff officers work through the night recalculating fuel consumption, ammunition expenditure, and transport availability, aware that even a short interruption could force difficult choices. Patton remains outwardly confident, dismissing concerns that do not present themselves as immediate obstacles. But his inner circle understands that the pace he demands leaves no room for complacency. German command, meanwhile, adapts its tactics to the new reality. Large-scale counteroffensives are no longer feasible, but targeted resistance is. Bridges are destroyed at the last possible moment, road junctions are mined, and small, determined units are ordered to delay rather than defeat. These actions are designed to buy time, not victory, yet time itself has become a weapon. Every hour gained forces the Allies to confront the sustainability of their advance. At Supreme Headquarters, these developments sharpen the debate over control. Eisenhower's staff produces assessments that increasingly emphasize risk management over opportunity. There is concern that Patton's momentum, once the Allies' greatest advantage, could become a liability if the Germans manage to exploit a single weakness. Communications between commands grow more frequent and more carefully worded, reflecting a desire to influence outcomes without provoking confrontation. Patton interprets this scrutiny as a test of resolve rather than a warning. He continues to push reconnaissance units forward, probing for gaps and weaknesses, convinced that the enemy is closer to collapse than cautious estimates suggest. His belief is reinforced by the steady stream of prisoners and the visible deterioration of German morale. To him, the danger lies not in moving too fast, but in allowing the enemy a moment to recover. For the soldiers on the line, the campaign settles into a rhythm defined by constant movement and sudden violence. Advances are punctuated by sharp engagements that flare and fade with little warning. Villages change hands in hours, sometimes minutes, leaving behind destruction that underscores the cost of speed. The uncertainty of what lies ahead weighs heavily, even as the sense of progress sustains the will to continue. As winter approaches, weather becomes an increasingly influential factor. Cold rains and early snow complicate mobility, slow supply convoys, and test equipment pushed beyond its intended limits. These conditions amplify the concerns of Allied leadership, who see in them the potential for a rapid reversal of fortune. Patton, however, views the same conditions as another variable to be overcome, not a reason to pause. The effort to restrain Third Army now takes on a more formal tone. Directives emphasize consolidation, security, and coordination, signaling a shift toward caution without explicitly ordering a halt. Patton complies selectively, reinforcing key positions while continuing to advance elsewhere, balancing obedience with initiative in a way that keeps his superiors uneasy. This uneasy equilibrium defines the campaign as it moves toward winter. Momentum and restraint coexist in constant tension, each shaping decisions at every level of command. The Allies continue forward, not because all doubts have been resolved, but because events on the ground allow no easy alternative. The attempt to rein Patton in remains incomplete, overshadowed by the reality that the war itself is now driving the pace.